Every family seems to have had one. The grandmother, who would not part with her blue and white dishes. The ones with the little bridge, the two birds, and the willow tree bending over a river. For years, the rest of the family gently teased her about them. They were old-fashioned. They crowded the cabinet. Someone was always suggesting she thin them out, sell a few, make room for something newer, and every time, she quietly refused, wrapped them back in their tissue paper, and closed the cabinet door. It turns out she was right, because certain pieces of that blue willow, the pattern so common that most people assume it must be worthless, are now worth hundreds and even thousands of dollars. And the family that kept the set together instead of scattering it at a tag sale did exactly the right thing. This is a countdown of 15 blue willow pieces that are quietly worth a fortune. And the reason so few people believe it is that willow is everywhere. It has been made for nearly 250 years by hundreds of makers in every quality, from museum-grade English porcelain to cheap modern imports sold by the crate. That flood of common willow is exactly why the valuable pieces hide in plain sight, dismissed as just more of grandma's old dishes. But four things separate a $2 plate from a $2,000 treasure: who made it, how old it is, what form it takes, and what color it wears. And the piece sitting at number 1 is the oldest and finest willow of all, teased here and revealed at the end. Before the countdown begins, one quick favor. If there is blue willow in a cabinet somewhere in the house, turn a piece over and leave a comment with whatever is printed on the back, or a note that there is no mark at all, because with willow, no mark can mean something surprisingly special. And subscribe before the cabinet closes again, because the list climbs steadily from this point on. And the last few pieces are the ones Grandma was most right to keep. Coming in at number 15 are the pieces almost every household already owns: the dinner plates. Willow plates are so common that most people would price a stack at $1 or $2 a piece and never think again. But the plate is where the single most important willow lesson lives, and it lives on the back. Turn the plate over and read the mark, because there is a rule worth memorizing. Almost any willow piece made after 1842 carries some kind of printed maker's mark, while pieces made before that often carry none at all. So a completely unmarked plate is not automatically worthless junk. It can occasionally be a genuinely old piece from before the age of marks. The everyday modern plates from 20th century import makers really are worth only a few dollars, but an early English plate from a named pottery can bring $30, $60, $100 and more. The back of the plate is the whole story, and the next pieces reward the same habit of turning things over. The pieces people handle every single day without a second thought sit at number 14, the cups and saucers. A willow cup feels utterly ordinary, and the common ones are $5 to $25 for a modern pair. But age hides in the details here. The earliest willow teacups were made without handles, in the old style, and a delicate handleless cup with a soft, slightly blurred transfer and a lighter, almost powdery glaze is often far older than it looks. Early glaze has a softness to it, a faint unevenness in the ink, while modern pieces are hard, bright, and perfectly uniform. A pristine early 19th century willow teacup by a maker like Spode can fetch hundreds of dollars on its own for something that looks, to an untrained eye, like any old cup in the cupboard. The tell is that softness and that early, handleless form. And the next pieces test whether a buyer can tell a true antique surface from a modern copy. That brings the countdown to number 13 and to the humble soup and dessert plates, the smaller flatware that fills out any willow service. On their own, they seem like filler, but they carry a crucial tell: the difference between genuine transferware and a modern printed decal. On a true antique piece, the pattern was transferred from an inked copper plate, and under a close look, the design is built from fine engraved lines that sometimes blur or overlap slightly where the paper wrinkled. A modern decal sits flat and perfect on the surface, often with a faint dotted or screen texture. Learning to see that difference is worth real money, because it separates a genuine old service from a decorated reproduction. And there is a second lesson here: a complete, matched antique service, every plate from the same maker and era, is worth dramatically more together than the same plates sold off one by one. The next pieces prove that the maker's name can matter as much as the form. Number 12 belongs to the open serving bowls, the round and oval vegetable dishes that anchor a table. Here, the great lesson is that not all Willow is created equal, because the maker's name changes everything. Standard Willow from an anonymous factory is modest, but the same bowl, in the same condition and age, from a celebrated English pottery like Booth's, Burley, or in the sought-after Mandarin version of the pattern, can be worth several times as much. Collectors chase those names specifically. A common open bowl might bring $20 or $30, while a fine Booth's or Burley example climbs well into the hundreds. The tell is the backstamp again, but read for the specific maker, because the difference between a forgettable name and a coveted one is the difference between pocket change and a genuine find. And from here, the Willow starts to stand up off the table into the hollowware, where values rise fastest. Settling in at number 11 is the first real piece of hollowware, the gravy boat, sometimes with its own matching underplate. Flat plates were pressed by the million, but a curved three-dimensional serving piece was harder to make and harder to survive intact, so far fewer remain. A gravy boat with its original attached or matching stand is more desirable still, because the two pieces are so easily separated over the decades. Common examples trade in the $30 to $80 range, but early or finely made ones, especially from a named English maker, climb into the low hundreds. The tell is completeness, the boat and its stand together, and the same maker's mark check. And the next piece was one of the most technically difficult things a Willow pottery ever attempted. The countdown reaches number 10 with a piece that was genuinely hard to make, the teapot. Wrapping the intricate Willow scene around the curves of a pot, a spout, and a lid, and firing it all without cracking, took real skill, which is why antique Willow teapots are far scarcer than plates and command far more. The catch, and the tell, is the lid, because lids were dropped, chipped, and lost constantly, and a teapot missing its original lid loses a large share of its value in an instant. A complete antique Willow teapot with its matching lid intact can bring $100 to several $100s, and early examples from top makers climb higher still. The next piece hides the very same lesson under a different lid. Number 9 is the covered vegetable dish, the lidded serving bowl that once carried the potatoes to a Sunday table. Like the teapot, its value lives and dies with its lid, and a complete covered dish with a perfectly matched top is a genuinely uncommon survivor. Most of them were separated long ago, the bowl used on as an open dish, the lid broken or lost, so an intact one stands out. Complete examples commonly trade from $60 to $200, with early and finely marked ones reaching well beyond. The tell is that matched, undamaged lid, and the crispness of the pattern across both pieces. And the next form is one that turns up in nearly every old kitchen, usually undervalued. The pitcher turns up in almost every old kitchen, and it lands at number 8, the Willow jug, in every size from a small creamer to a tall water pitcher. Because pitchers were workhorses, they often survived in good numbers, and people assume that makes them cheap. But a large, well-shaped Willow jug is a real display piece, and collectors pay accordingly, especially for the graceful early forms and the larger sizes. A small common creamer might be $20, but a big antique water jug from a named maker can bring $100 to $300 and more. The tell is the form and the size together with the maker, because a tall, early, well-marked jug is far more than the everyday piece it resembles. From here, the countdown leaves the everyday table settings behind, because the final 7 pieces are where Willow becomes a genuine treasure. Coming in at number 7 is the showpiece of the Willow table, the large platter, and above all the version known as well and tree. A well and tree platter has channels molded into its surface, a tree-shaped groove that funnels juices down into a well at one end, and these large, heavy serving platters were made to carry a roast to the table in style. Size drives the value, because the biggest platters are the hardest to make, the hardest to store, and the hardest to survive unbroken. A modest platter might bring $40, but a large early well and tree platter from a fine maker can reach several $100s, and the grandest antique examples climb toward $1,000. The tell is the size, the molded well and tree channels, and the maker's mark underneath. The next pieces are the small covered luxuries that most people never even knew existed in Willow. Number 6 belongs to the small covered luxuries, the butter dish and the cheese dome. Willow was not only everyday plates. The finer potteries made specialized covered pieces. A domed dish to keep a wedge of cheese, a lidded butter dish with a drainer inside, and these were made in far smaller numbers than dinnerware. Because they are unusual, and because their lids and inserts were so easily lost, a complete example is a scarce thing. A complete Willow butter dish or cheese keeper commonly trades from $80 to $250, with early and unusual forms reaching higher. The tell is completeness, every part present and matched, and the recognition that these specialized forms were never common to begin with, and the next pieces required more handwork than any other Willow ever made. The most labor-intensive Willow of all arrives at number 5, the reticulated or pierced pieces. Reticulated Willow has delicate openwork, cut by hand into the rim or body of a piece. A lattice of little openings in a chestnut basket, a fruit comport, or a pierced serving plate, and every one of those openings had to be cut individually before firing. That handwork made the pieces expensive when they were new and rare today, because the fragile pierced sections chipped and broke so easily. Genuine antique reticulated Willow can bring $200 to $600 and more, depending on the maker and the intricacy of the piercing. The tell is that hand-cut openwork, which no cheap modern piece bothers to reproduce, and the finer and more delicate the lattice, the older and more valuable the piece tends to be. The next pieces are the ones where a single missing part decides a fortune. Number 4 is where completeness decides everything. The tureens, both the small sauce tureens and the grand soup tureens. A tureen is the aristocrat of the serving table, and a complete one is a set of parts. The deep body, the fitted lid, the underplate or stand, and the ladle, all matched to one another. Complete antique tureens are genuinely scarce, because over a century or more the ladle wanders off, the lid chips, the stand gets used separately. A bare tureen body might bring $100, but a complete matched antique soup tureen with every part present, from a good English maker, can climb from several hundred into the low thousands of dollars. The tell is that full set of components, all clearly from the same tureen, because each missing piece takes a large bite out of the value, and the final 3 pieces break away from the color blue entirely. The countdown's final 3 leave the familiar blue behind, beginning at number 3 with the rare color Willow. The Willow pattern was printed in blue far more than anything else, but it was also produced in red, sometimes called pink, and in green, brown, black, and a purple shade called mulberry. And some pieces combine 2 colors, or add hand-painted polychrome touches. Red Willow in particular is one of the scarcer transfers, and it runs noticeably higher per piece than the everyday blue, with a red plate often worth several times its blue twin. A rare color or 2-color Willow piece, especially from an early maker, can climb well into the hundreds and beyond. The tell could not be simpler. Any Willow that is not the standard blue deserves a much closer look, because color alone can multiply the value. And the last 2 pieces come down to 2 specific names. Number 2 is America's own contribution to the pattern, Buffalo Pottery Willow. American potteries did not make Willow until 1905, when the Buffalo Pottery Company in New York became the first to produce it in the United States, and their early pieces, marked and dated in the years from 1905 to around 1916, are especially prized today. Buffalo Pottery Willow has a rich, deep color and a heavy quality body, and collectors seek out those dated marks specifically. Pieces commonly trade from $50 to $300, and the scarcer early forms and larger serving pieces climb well beyond that. The tell is the Buffalo Pottery backstamp with its date, an American mark on a pattern most people assume is only English, and a name that turns an overlooked plate into a sought-after collectible. And that leaves the oldest and finest Willow of them all. And that brings the countdown to number 1, the early English pieces from the founders of the pattern, Spode and Cawley. This is where Willow began, in England in the 1790s, and the earliest pieces from Spode, along with the very early Willow-style wares from the Cawley pottery, are the aristocrats of the entire category. These are the pieces with the soft, slightly uneven glaze, the gentle blurring of a hand-finished transfer, and often no printed mark at all, because they predate the age of marks. To an untrained eye, they look like any other old blue and white dish, which is exactly why they slip through tag sales and estate sales unnoticed. But a genuine early Spode or Collie Willow piece, particularly a large serving form in good condition, can be worth well into the thousands of dollars. The tell is age itself, the softness of the glaze, the character of the transfer, and an early maker's mark or the telling absence of one, and a piece like this is worth having appraised rather than sold on a hunch. It is the crown of the humble blue and white, and here is the quiet vindication of number one. The plainest looking old dish in the cabinet can be the oldest, the rarest, and the most valuable thing in the entire house. Look back across all 15 and one thread runs through every single piece. Willow was never one thing. It was made for 2.5 centuries at every level of quality, and the pieces that became treasures did so for reasons that have almost nothing to do with the familiar picture on the front and almost everything to do with a few specific details. The maker's name, the age of the glaze, the rarity of the form, the presence of every matching part, and the color of the transfer. The people who let fortunes slip away with Willow almost never do it dramatically. They do it quietly, by deciding that a stack of old blue and white dishes is just clutter, simply because no one ever taught them what to look for. Grandma, as it turns out, was the one who knew. So here is the one rule worth carrying away. Before any blue and white china leaves the house, before it goes in the tag sale, before it is handed to a stranger for a couple of dollars, turn each piece over, read the mark or note the lack of one, study the softness of the glaze, and count whether every lid and stand and ladle is still present. Never sell Grandma's Willow before checking. The difference between a $2 plate and a $2,000 treasure is often nothing more than 30 seconds and a little bit of knowledge. One last question, because this pattern has a way of living in nearly every family's cabinet. Which of these pieces is behind the glass doors in the house right now? And be honest, which one nearly got sold before its true worth was known? Leave it in the comments because someone listening is about to go open their own cabinet, and the next quiet fortune on a list like this one might be the piece Grandma refused to let go.